Hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Chris Maloney back with you for another edition of CWN Interview. Second one I've done officially for the CWN website. Very honored, very proud to have this next individual with me here. Huge fan of his, and have been for a while, as well as all the accomplishments that he has done. He was born in Kitchener, Ontario, resides in Toronto, celebrated his 50th birthday back in February. He's the creator of the Canadian Wrestling Report, co-founder of Slam Wrestling, author of 17 books and counting according to Twitter, as well as a stay-at-home dad and a tea drinker. I'm going to get more into that because most people here in Canada love their coffee. He is also a Cleveland Browns fan. So that's going to be interesting to talk about there. But I'm referring to the one and only Greg Oliver of Slam Wrestling. Greg, how you doing today? Thank you very much for joining me.
I'm good, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. How's the weather there in Toronto? It's 21 here in London today.
Yeah, it's not bad out there. I was out for a walk a little bit earlier, but I'm inside now and probably go out again later. It is what it is. We're in lockdown, so you get out when you can.
Yeah, so I've got to ask right away. Cleveland Browns, how come?
That's a good question. I didn't really have a lot of allegiances growing up. It was always whatever my brother was cheering for, I would cheer against. So if it was, he was a Dolphins fan, that made me a Chargers fan. Or, we always had contrary views. So if he liked the Lakers, I was a Celtics fan. But then, you do a couple of trips to Cleveland and you're all in. So buddies of mine were going down for the games, and there's no experience like it. It's so much. It's just a wonderful culture, and there's a great big huge Toronto Browns backer group here in Toronto. It's the largest Browns backers club outside of Ohio. In Toronto.
How long have you been a fan of the Browns then?
I don't know, a dozen years hardcore, I guess, maybe a little longer.
So you must have been excited about this year.
It was a good year, yeah. It was a really good year. And yet what's crazy is, of course, we have this home not too far from my house called Shocks. It's a bar not far, and we couldn't go celebrate. You couldn't be there for all these great moments together. So it's not quite the same celebrating online.
Yeah, I'm a Patriots fan, so it was not a good year for me. So it's I wasn't too bad. Too ashamed to be.
Long overdue for you guys to suck. So
I know, and then Edelman retires this year. So anyway, that's a different story. But I want to talk to you about a lot of topics here. First one being the Canadian Wrestling Report. Kitchener, Ontario. That is where you're from, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And according to the lovely thing called the internet, August 1985 to August 1990, 61 issues in total from what I've seen. How did you get into wanting to do the newsletter? How did the concept come about? And how did you distribute it back then?
Oh, it's mail. I know it's hard to understand, eh? Like kids today just don't get it. Long story short, Hulkamania ran wild over me. Like it was 1985. Schoolyard was a buzz. And it coincided with us getting an Apple IIe computer, and we got a program called, it was a desktop publishing program. So we started playing around, and, wrestling was hot. So we put out like a little one-page newsletter. My dad took it to the office. Everybody else was kind of a wrestling fan at the time. So we sold a couple, and it's like, hey, let's do some more. And it grew from there. We got a better program, all those kind of things. But it really, because it coincided with my getting a personal computer and really learning things, they all worked parallel. My dad at the time also ran a home business called the Buyer's Guide to Factory Outlets in Ontario, and so we were doing a lot of mailing anyway, so that they tied in really nicely. There's good synchronicity, and Dad was able to help me a lot. Though I mean, my newsletter went around the world. It was pretty cool. I'm still friends with some of my subscribers. It's really crazy.
And that, we're looking at 1990, so we're looking at a good 30 years ago.
Yeah, I'm old. Is that what you're saying? Yes. But yeah, it is really cool that, you make a lot of friends along the way. And unfortunately, some are gone, but, that's life, right?
So from there, we go on to Ryerson University. 1993, looks like you had graduated from Ryerson. Do you remember your first day versus your last day at Ryerson?
Well, the thing about when I went there for the journalism program is that it went from this tiny, beaten down old hovel, where there was two computers and rows and rows of typewriters, till they opened the Rogers Communications Center, which was the brand new spanking facility for my second year. So, I mean, there's really a big difference between my first and my third year there. So we were at the end, we're using, brand new Macs and great big, huge facility. And it was really a good harbinger of things to come about how journalism really was. I lucked out and got a job at the Toronto Sun for my first summer. So I was learning all those things, both in school and in real practical time. So I was very fortunate that way.
So friendships still to this day from Ryerson, as well as your thoughts on journalism back in 1993 versus journalism today in 2021.
Well, the basis of journalism hasn't changed, right? You're asking questions, you're getting facts. You don't publish till you get it right. It's just the speed of it's all come up, obviously. You try to do things a lot faster. There's different ways to get your messages out there. But real journalism still exists, and that's one thing we've always done with Slam Wrestling, and I'm very proud of it. Is so many of our people have journalism backgrounds, and that's really what we pride ourselves on. We're not some rumor mongering site.
So I've got two topics that kind of coincide together, but it's kind of the old Slam Wrestling versus the new Slam Wrestling. So you were working for Toronto Sun Canoe, left Canoe in 2001, is that right?
Yeah, so I was part of a downsizing at the time, and then it was about a year and a half later, they realized the wrestling numbers had tanked, and it had been like among the top part of the site continuously. So they rehired me on a freelance basis to run the wrestling site, and that lasted right up until last May 2020, when Post Media decided that they needed to make some cost cutting. And the Slam Wrestling brand was one of them. But they recognized that, we had earned the right to use the name Slam Wrestling. So they gifted it to us on the way out the door with a swift kick in the behind.
So how did the original Slam Wrestling website come about, as well as what's your criteria for selecting your team to write for the website?
Both good questions. It really coincided with, again, wrestling was running wild. 1996, you had the early days of the Monday Night Wars. WCW was certainly hot at the time. And John Powell was one of the writers or one of the people hired to work at Canoe.ca. He hadn't been in the Sun, so I didn't know him from there. And we got to know each other at Canoe and realized he was a big wrestling fan. We already had some content from the Suns with Bret Hart's column. Glenn Cole did a column in the Toronto Sun. Tim Baines was the mysterious Mr. X in the Ottawa Sun. And so we had some great content already. And at that point, let me think. The WrestleMania 6 Toronto Sun was among the top 10 sellers of all time. So, and up until the Blue Jays won the World Series, it was the top seller. So we knew that the Sun would be a good partner, obviously, in all the wrestling stuff. And so we kept building on that, and created a little site. From there, people started to come out of the woodwork, and guys like Nick Tywok and Dale Plummer and Bob Kapur and Jason Clevitt have all been with us for like over 20 years, which is insane. And, they're just good writers. Almost everybody does this sort of as a part-time gig, and that's cool. Right? It's not meant to be all encompassing. We love wrestling, but you've got to earn a paycheck somewhere else. I've got to earn a paycheck somewhere else. It's been a nice side hustle, I guess.
Yeah, we will definitely get to that. Bob Kapur is an interesting fella. It's I was at SummerSlam a couple of years ago there in Toronto, and I had to use the washroom, so I leave my seat. And of all people, just drifting the hallways in the ACC Scotiabank Arena was Bob Kapur. So I had to go up and shake his hand and say, "Hey, pleased to meet you." What are your thoughts on him and his stint with Impact Wrestling? Were you a fan of that?
It's hard not to be a fan of anything Bob does. He's just such a good guy, and he's always so memorable with his tie-dye shirts or whatever it is he's wearing at ringside. And it's kind of funny because both Bob and I have ended up being the face of Slam Wrestling, simply because some of the other people don't get out as much and get to these events. But I'm at the Cauliflower Alley Club or the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame inductions or whatever. So people immediately associate me and Bob with the site. But yeah, he's a really good guy. He's really conscientious. He's really connected. He'd done other things with Impact, right? Like he's known those guys forever, as have I. So it wasn't really a surprise when they asked him to do an on-camera role like that. And man, he got to hang out with Scarlett Bordeaux. I mean, life's okay. A little jealousy there.
Yeah, he's a fine gentleman there. The transition into from Slam Wrestling into SlamWrestling.net. How is the process going so far? And I mean, you guys had a lot of content on the original Canoe site. So where are we at with the process? And the bigger question I want to ask you is the Canadian Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. When are we going to get to see that once again?
That's funny. I was just exchanging an email with somebody about that today. Long story short, we owned the rights to all our content. So that's one of the smart things I did back when we restarted after 2001. So that was in early 2003 when I came back before WrestleMania. And we had the contract stated we owned our content. So anything that we created originally was ours. What we didn't get the rights to were Sun Media and Post Media stories. So they all disappeared into the ether. And it's a real shame because, of course, there's lots of great stuff from, Coach Glenn Cole's interviews with Stone Cold, or the time Tim Baines went and hung out with Sable at a bikini shoot on the beach. So we had some really great stuff, and all the Sunshine Girls, right? And Sunshine Boys. We had Edge as a Sunshine Boy. We had Christian. We had the famous Rock fanny pack picture was a Sunshine Boy picture. So for a while, like, we had the rights to run that photo, and really nobody else did. But of course, the internet being the internet, that nothing really goes like that. So the Sun and Post Media had to give us back all our content, which was complicated. And I think there's 15,000 stories that we got dumped, if I'm remembering correctly. It might have been 11,000. And we had to figure a way to parse all that, deal with all that. And we partnered with a company down in Nashville that was associated with John Arezzi, who I worked with a book on. So it all, you never know where your next connections are going to come with. And but we managed to get it all up there. The Canadian Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame was not a priority because there were so many little pieces to it that were never really fleshed out, right? It might have been a bio of somebody or just a name. So in the coming months, we have at least one intern starting with us. And that's on my list of things to do. Let's put it that way. So let me know what you want. You send in your email, send in your notes, what you really want to see with the Canadian Hall of Fame, because a lot of the people that are in it have asked me, when's it going back up?
Yeah, I read somewhere just recently it was your pride and joy, so it's I'm waiting to see it up on Slam. With regards to Slam Wrestling, you've got your columns, you've got your news, you got your rumors, everything else. But one of the things that comes along with Slam Wrestling in depth at that is the obituaries that you personally that you write. How hard is it sometimes to come up with facts behind them or personal stories behind them? And it seems like 2020, 2021, we've had a lot of them lately.
Okay, hard is not the right word, because I gather, right? I'm always gathering information, right? So if you get a new book and somebody mentions something about, I don't know, Buck Robley, I've made a note to myself that there's a thing about Buck Robley there. So when he died, I was able to go just grab that. So a little bit of it's just, I mean, I worked in a library for 3 years. So I know the importance of really organizing things. And I think I've done a good job with the wrestling side of things. The rest of my life, my wife would say, is not all that organized, but I know where stuff is. So there's that aspect. The actual writing the pieces, I want to do the best job possible and honor these people, but I also want it to be factual. I don't want it to be, I don't know what the great word is there. Because sometimes people will skirt around the issues and not talk about the actual things that happened in this guy's life, good and bad, right? A good example is when Bruiser Bob Sweetana died. I bet I was the only guy alive who ever really interviewed him. But I didn't want to run the story until he died. That's just being honest. The guy was a terrible human being. Nobody liked him. He, raped his daughter. All these things. He'd been deported back to Canada from the U.S. after his 3 strikes. So I had all this information and I just sat on it till he died. And so you have to cover all that stuff in there. And it makes it a little bit tricky. But again, all that real journalism background comes in handy. I'm not the only guy that does the obituaries at the site, but I do get known a lot for doing them. And a lot of them are piggybacked on whatever research that Steve Johnson and I did for the various books over the years.
So it just got me thinking about one. Corporal Kirshner, was that related to Slam Wrestling?
Yeah, that was the one that found him when WWE announced him. Sorry, that's happened twice with various things where people have announced the dead. It was also Rex King was the other one from the Southern Rockers. But the Corporal Kirshner one was hilarious because WWE.com had reported his death, and they had the name of somebody that wasn't Mike Kirshner, and it didn't really make any sense. So I tracked down his mom, and she goes, "Oh, well, he's driving a truck. Here's his number." So I talked to him while he's driving his truck and report back that, he's not dead. Of course, WWE and their ultimate, ego never actually put a retraction up, never, just silently took the story away. So I see myself as a historian, I guess, a lot of ways, and also a fact checker, I guess.
So outside of everything that you've accomplished, your personal thoughts on Pro Wrestling 2021, the so-called Forbidden Door being kicked open, as well as your favorite era in pro wrestling of all time?
Well, I mean, nothing ever compared. It's the same with the 1970s Toronto Maple Leafs, right? Those late 70s Leafs are my heart and soul, right? And when you get to interview Daryl Sittler, I'm still that 9-year-old boy talking to the captain of the Leafs. And the same for me with Hulkamania, right? And the Roddy Pipers and the Greg Valentines and the Bob Ortons and all those guys from that era. That was what got me hooked. And they're still the ones that sort of mean the most to me. And all those surreal experiences, having breakfast with a Tully Blanchard, or, Bob Orton Jr. smoking pot in your room. Like, there's all these weird things that happen as life progresses, and you realize these are just normal guys, but yet they're also the ones that I loved watching growing up. Wrestling today ain't the same. I'm not the only one that's going to say that. I'm glad that at Slam we have so many people who are young and still into the product, and that keeps us fresh and relevant, because I couldn't watch it. And there's many reasons for that. For one, I've got other interests, but it's just there's got to be somebody that captures your attention. And as great as it is seeing, as you do too, it's like, you see somebody in the indies and they finally succeed, like a Josh Alexander, you're really happy for them. But, there's all the other stuff that I'm just not that into myself personally. I'd rather talk to somebody than watch TV. So
did you have more interest this past Sunday with regards to Rebellion or the Rowdy Piper on A&E?
Well, again, other people cover these things for me, so I don't have to watch a lot of the shows or the pay-per-views. I taped the Piper one, but I haven't watched it yet. I just I didn't have a chance on Sunday night. And it was funny because our guy who did report on it, Tommy Milagro, who lives out in Utah, and I sent him a note. I bet you $10 that they're going to mention that Roddy Piper was 16 years old. The whole Larry Hennig match in Winnipeg Arena, Roddy the Piper, and he lost in 16 seconds. And I said, Tommy, no, that's true, but I bet it'll be in there. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And again, being the fact checker, I actually asked Roddy that one time in person. I say, why did you change your story? Why have you written out Tony Condello? Why have you written out Al Tomko and what they meant to your career? And you just sort of get the Piper deaths there. So, it's unfortunate. I mean, he's more famous than me, so he was allowed to change his story.
So back into the career of Greg Oliver, 2008 James Melby Memorial Award for Wrestling Journalism from the George Tragos Lou Thesz Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. A fan question actually came in and asked me to ask you what happened between you and Bret Hart.
Always a fun question. So Steve Johnson and I got a co-award that year. That afternoon, there was a separate award presentation that was a little bit more open to fans, a lot more informal. And that's where Steve and I got our award. I gave copy of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Heels, which had just come out, to Bret, and I signed it. And I said, your favorite heel is on page whatever Archie Gooley was on. Right? I thought that was a nice gesture, right? Bret had always been cool. He did the column for the Calgary Sun. I'd been to his house and interviewed him. So, I thought that was the right thing to do. Whatever it was, apparently that was the trigger that set him off that night when he was inducting his father into the Tragos Thesz Hall of Fame, which is mainly amateur based. He decided to use that as a rant against wrestling journalists and specifically pointing at me. And I was there with my father, and then Steve Johnson was there with his wife, Cindy. Steve and Cindy got up and left during it, but Bret just kept going, and it was really awkward. In the end, he said, either you leave or I leave. And I just gave him a little wave, and he stormed out of there like he was a 6-year-old child. It was really bizarre. And then there's the afterwards, where, guys like Baron von Raschke are coming up and say, he doesn't speak for me. And later in the bar, it was, the same thing. You got a few loyal friends who stuck by you, while others felt they had to go kiss Bret's ass. So whatever. I don't have a problem with Bret Hart. I never have. I still don't. I have a lot of empathy for everything he's gone through, from his personal losses of his family to, his stroke, his concussion issues and things like that. So, I just wish Bret had talked to me about his issues with me in person before that. And there had been at least 2 or 3 opportunities.
So besides Slim Wrestling, obviously, as I mentioned in the intro, there's 17 books and counting. One of those series is the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame book series. And now we have the Canadians, the tag teams, the heels, heroes and icons, and the storytellers, which I have behind me, autographed by you. Thank you very much. What was your motivation to write about each and every one of those topics?
When I was first approached by ECW Press and the editor there, Michael Holmes, that does most of the wrestling stuff, he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I really want to do a book about Canadian wrestling. And so that was the genesis of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the Canadians. Once the template and the format was sort of established, it was pretty straightforward. Steve Johnson reached out to me because he'd gotten a copy of the book and said, I really like this. Steve and I developed a friendship. He's that much older than me that he was a good mentor for me. And I think he really challenged me a lot, and we did a lot. Our work just got better and better. The storytellers, the writing in the storytellers is exquisite, and the research and all that it just, as I said, it got better. I mean, I look at tag teams almost quaintly now, and it's been the bestseller of them all, but it's not as good as it could be. And that's just reality of life, right? But tag teams made sense because Steve and I were starting, and then bad guys and good guys make sense. But you couldn't use baby faces because it didn't make sense to your layman, right? To the person just walking by. They're not going to know what that means. So that's why we came up with heroes and icons, which was a way to throw in anti-heroes. And storytellers was meant to be a catch-all title in the sense that a lot of them are threads that we never really went down, like those rabbit holes to do something about Tuffy Truesdale as an alligator, or the different stories that were intriguing but never made it in the previous books.
So next question is a 2-parter. How long does it take to create an idea topic all the way through the book getting published, as well as the level of patience and interest from your immediate family throughout the process? I'll start with the second one first. Just my wife is a writer. She went to journalism school too. That's where we actually met in the summer. But so she has a good understanding of what is involved. She did the Missing Links book, Dewey Robertson. So she understands that process as well, and dealing with somebody again and again and again. My son's always been great. He's 14 now, but back when he was 6 and 7, we did the Duck with the Puck, a book together. So he understands the publishing process too. But every book is different, right? The Billy Van book, which we'll talk about in a bit, I mean, that took like a dozen years because it stops and starts. The one I did, written in blue and white, about historical contracts with the Leafs, I think knocked it out in 6 months. So every book is different. But the ones with Steve, they were generally about 2 years, I think is the best way. But Storytellers was, an accumulation, right? A lot of those interviews we used were from guys who were long gone because we'd always hoped to do something with it, whether it was at the website or whether it was in book format. So one of the books that you've written, published, so to speak, is the very controversial here in Canada, across the wrestling world as well. It's called Benoit, Wrestling with a Horror That Destroyed a Family and Crippled a Sport. your thoughts on when the news broke of Benoit passing away, and then the follow-up with regards to Nancy, as well as his son, as well as how hard was it to write that book as a wrestling fan?
There's a lot in that question. What's the best way to put it? I was the one that had a personal relationship with them and had exchanged emails and had some great stuff to use. So I had a slightly different role in that book than Steve Johnston, who did a lot of the media stuff, Irv Muchnick, who did the muckraking, calling WWE to task, and then Heath McCoy, that did a lot of the historical stuff out of Stampede. So we all worked together to do that book rather quickly. Of course, we were all shocked and appalled by what Benoit did, because it didn't strike us as the guy we knew. And in all cases, I think we'd all met Benoit at some point. I mean, he'd been to a Cauliflower Rally Club reunion, so I can remember talking to him at the back, at the back of the room, just for a little while, just chatting. And we'd done previous chats before. I probably did one of his first long interviews when he started in WCW, talking about his career. So we went way back. One of the things I fought for and won in that book is to do a whole section on Nancy as well. So there's a piece in there about her career and what she did in the ring, what she did as a manager, all that kind of stuff. And it was, of all the books we did, it's the one that sold the most and sold a lot quickly. But then, like a lot of true crime books, it sort of drifted off. And what I found lately is that back when I could go to shows and sell things in person, you'd get a lot of younger people coming up going, hey, I'm really curious about this. Is this a good starter book for it? And it is. It's much more of a starter book than, say, Irv Muchnick's Chris and Nancy book, which is, really in depth and really takes you into the seediness of it all.
So going from there, I got to get your thoughts on Dark Side of the Ring. Have you watched any of the episodes? As well as, Brian Pillman's coming up on May 6th for the debut for season 3. Just what are your thoughts on the series as a whole?
They've done a good job. They're somewhat handicapped by how long they have, of course, and the ability to tell visual storytelling. They've gone around it by using mainly Ontario indie guys, as we know, to do some of the reenactments and stuff, and it works. They have to leave stuff out. It's just the nature of any beast. I mean, the same as the Piper, documentary, or the Stone Cold. It's not going to have everything in there, so they have to pick and choose. But in general, they've been much more tailored to wrestling fans than the A&E biography, which has to be a lot broader, I think, for a bigger audience. The Vice audience, like, they know that they're going to be drawing the wrestling fans. So I don't really have any big complaints about them. I know I helped, and I'm really looking forward to the Johnny Canine one this year that's coming out, because I know Canine and I helped them with source pictures and video, because I used to do a newsletter, a program for Johnny Canine's promotion in Hamilton. So John and I went way back, and I remember being really disappointed. I didn't know he'd been transferred to a halfway house here in Toronto that I was close enough to walk to. Like, I would have gone to visit him for sure. And I don't say that about a lot of guys, because wrestling's a funny business that way. But some guys you're just loyal to. And I knew he was a crook and a cheat and a criminal, but he was still my friend, right?
So I was reading up on him just before the interview here, and the Canine, I guess he got arrested, and that's where he came up with the Canine gimmick. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. He was a big wrestling fan, though, even when he was younger, before he got in all the trouble with the law. So I'm sure, he would have had some run-ins, but yeah, it worked for his character. And then he just kept milking. But the Bruiser Bedlam thing he did down in Smoky Mountain worked for him as well.
So we can't talk about documentaries without mentioning one that I absolutely loved, and that was Sweet Daddy Siki. And I had no idea that it was originally produced back in 2017, if that's right. So first of all, praise for the documentary, because I ended up watching it like 12:30 at night, and I was like, I had so many questions, post doc. But what was the process like for getting everybody involved? The time it took to film, as well as the fact, it's still getting praise here in 2021.
Well, you need to take a small step back, because the Sheik documentary about the Iron Sheik was mainly about the Megans, right? And they had a lot of role in there, and they look at Sheik as the uncle, and they help him with all his appearances and have kept him alive on social media. And they kept wanting to do another project, and they kept bugging me. Let's talk to Siki. Let's talk to Siki. And Siki does not trust easily. So finally, we managed to all get them together. We went for it was like a dinner at the Mandarin, and they gave Siki the pitch with his son there as well. And they accepted the idea that it was time to finally tell Siki's story. So from there, it was a little bit out of my hands. I was the writer, so you have to do a script to be able to get the funding. That's essentially how it works in documentary world and the world of Canadian documentary funding. So we did that. My script has nothing to do with how the movie actually turned out. There actually was a previous director, and then the second one, Harv Glazer, who came in and really saved the day and made it all work. But I was there a lot of those interviews, and if I wasn't there, I sent in questions. I remember when they interviewed Edge for the Siki documentary, I was homesick. I had a cold or something and didn't want to go down, but I sent in all those questions. For whatever reason, I came up with the idea of him and Charlie Pride on camera together, and then Jeremy Schell is the producer who made it happen, but I didn't get to go. So, but talk about a wonderful moment, and Siki is forever grateful for that happening because that was one of his heroes. But yeah, Siki's story itself is remarkable. He was amazingly forthcoming. Do I love everything about the documentary? No, but that's the nature, like we talked about earlier, right? No matter what it is, you're never going to get everything in. But once it arrived on Amazon Prime outside of Canada, it changed everything, right? We went from just being available occasionally on CBC's documentary channel to it was available around the world, and people started talking about it. And it actually forced CBC to add it to its CBC Gem streaming service. You can watch it whenever you want now too. So it's one of those things. It took time for it to get there. It was a little bit out of our hands. CBC owned the rights to it for 5 years. So I'm glad it's back out there.
So 2020 James C. Melby Historian Award from the Cauliflower Alley Club. Is it ever going to take place? I remember seeing you recognized and announced for it. And two-part question: the honor of being recognized for the award, number one, but frustration with not being able to accept it officially yet because of the pandemic.
It's pretty neat to get a second James Melby Award. They're sort of different. In the one that is in Iowa at the Tragos Thesz one has a lot more to do with historical work and journalism, and the CAC is a little bit more about contributions in a bigger sense to wrestling journalism. But I've helped the CAC, the Cauliflower Alley Club, a lot. Whether it's helping our slam team doing the program, whether it's hosting the roving mic sometimes. So I really believe in it as an entity. And so it's pretty cool to do that. And having been up on stage many times, introducing other people, I'm really excited to get there one day. Unfortunately, it's in September this year, so there's really no guarantee that we'll be allowed to go. I'm certainly not going unless I've had both shots. And a lot of that's out of our hands, right? So whatever it will be, it will be. But I look forward to going there and having someone no doubt rant why I shouldn't get it.
Hilarious. All right, so guys, if you look behind us there is what looks to be Count Dracula, but it is not. It is the one and only Billy Van. It was interesting because I've always wanted to interview Greg Oliver formerly, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, there's a book comes out. It's called "Who's the Man, Billy Van" with Stacey Case, released last year, 2020, and I was like, holy crap, that is the guy who was Count Frightenstein. That hilarious House of Frightenstein for everybody here in Canada that should know that program. I want to know, first of all, did you watch the show as a kid? And if you did, who was your favorite character?
Yeah, of course I watched the show. And also Party Game. They go hand in hand. And because, in the morning you're watching this weirdness. And then dinner time hour, they've got Party Game on. You're watching them goof around. And then at some point it dawns on you that it's the same guy doing all these characters and doing this shtick at night. And I mean, I like them all. For sure. But the Griselda was just so weird. And for those of us in the 70s there, like Julia Child was a larger than life entity. And he was so mocking her. And then at the end, he'd have these little throwaways like, eat your heart out, Margaret Trudeau. little things like that. And it was very much of the time for sure. But I think Griselda was the one that I found the most interesting. You?
With me, yeah, definitely Griselda. I love the Wolfman though. The past couple of days, I've been talking to my wife, who's a teacher here in Ontario, but she never watched the show. So when I'm doing like I am the Wolfman and doing the howl, she just kind of looks at me. And then today, I showed her the actual opening for Hilarious House, and Vincent Price in that opening. And I've got a toddler who's going on 3 years old, and if I were to show her that, she'd probably run off scared, you know. But with me, when I was a kid, it was always my dad would make sure I was up at 7 a.m. during school days because that's when the show played, and making sure I caught the actual opening. So it was it's kind of cool to know. It was only, I think, 9 months of Hilarious House of Frightenstein. 130 episodes, if I'm correct about that, but it seemed like it had been on TV a lot longer. Beyond that, though, what was your motivation to write a book on Billy Van himself?
So Stacey Case is my co-writer on it, and he and I became friends through pro wrestling. I think we first met at one of Ron Hutchison's AWF shows, and just became friends. We traveled once down to the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame induction weekend in Amsterdam, New York. It's now in Wichita Falls, Texas. But Stacey and I went down, and we just talked about a lot of stuff, right? Obviously family stuff, but also wrestling and our interests. And we realized we both had a common interest in the Hilarious House of Frightenstein. And he had done a lot of the legwork already. He'd run the Billy Van or a Frightenstein Fan Fest. He'd met a few of the people, interviewed them. So there was a genesis there that we started. And I interviewed John Biner, who did Bizarre. But that was also a tie in the Slam because Rotten Reggie Love of the Love Brothers was on Bizarre a lot. So there was a nice tie in there. So I had all this stuff started, and it just sort of floundered, and other things happened in life. And it just carried on for a while. And finally, a couple of years ago, Stacey and I just sat down, let's do it. And once I got the involvement of his family, it really took off from there and grew and grew. And it was awesome for me as a journalist just to really stretch my legs, right? Because I'm writing about things I don't know as much about, right? Pro wrestling, I can write the story tomorrow and, know it's going to be fine. But in this case, I had to figure out, well, what were the early days of the CBC like? What was it like to go work at CHCH, and then they had the Agent Court Studios for CTV, all these different things I wanted to get right and interview the right people for it. So it was a real great challenge for me, and I'm really proud of the way it turned out.
So Billy Van passed away in 2003, age 68, due to cancer. How hard was it to get facts for the book itself? Like, obviously, journalists, you want to make sure everything's 100% accurate. But how hard was it? 17 years post passing, was it to fact check and everything else?
It was crazy because the guy didn't do a ton of interviews. He was very not secretive isn't the right word. He was never forthcoming with a lot of people. So his family learned things when I wrote the book. And that tells you a lot about how, secretive he was. Certainly when I would call colleagues or directors or producers or whoever that worked with him, you ask what they knew about him and they sort of were stumped. It's like, I don't know, didn't he have a daughter? Well, he had two daughters, right? He had one daughter he had nothing to do with that grew up basically out of his life. So that kind of stuff was fascinating and made me want to delve in more. And you really wish you could have gotten to talk to him. There's people I wish I could have gotten to talk to too. His last wife, common law wife, Susan, declined to participate. And I think it would have added a nice little conclusion to it all to be able to talk to her. He had a business partner who was still around and she never got back to me. So, you try and that's all you can do. But I still stand by it. Turned out pretty darn good.
All right. So follow-up question would be, how has the reception of the book been, especially among anybody who knows you from professional wrestling? Is it different to be talking about Billy Van as opposed to slam wrestling or just wrestling in general?
No, it's not any different. I mean, promotion's promotion, and it's nice to talk about something different. There's a lot of overlap, I think, just because wrestling fans are, by their very nature, attracted to something unique and different, right? They're not watching the same old sitcoms that everybody else was watching. They're watching something unique, and Frightenstein especially was pretty darn unique. But I found that overlap too, even with my hockey books, right? And you talk to Pierre Pilote, who's in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and I helped him with his book. I was the editor on that. And, you know, you find out, oh, yeah, I used to love watching wrestling. And then you talk wrestling and you know, those things are really neat. So there is a lot of overlap too. The guys that used to play for the Toronto Marlies, the junior hockey team, they would, you know, arrive back from wherever they were playing that Sunday afternoon, and the ring would be set up for the Sunday evening show at Maple Leaf Gardens. So they'd all be running down there and jumping in the ring before the show. So there's a lot of overlap with everything we do. And I think sometimes wrestling fans tend to think of themselves in a little bit of a bubble, but there really is a lot of spillover into the rest of society.
All right. So here's your chance to sell. Why should a wrestling fan buy the book about Billy Van?
to learn about something new, to expand their mind, to support me for all these years that I've given you stories for free on Slam Wrestling. But it's a fascinating story, right? It's the story of television as well, right? How does CBC grow, and then it becomes, you know, he moves into network TV in the US on Sonny and Cher, and then he comes back and does all the local work and the small time movies that start up and doing voiceover work. Those things, you know, still exist today, but they help explain a little bit of how we got there, where we are today. And I'm not sure he would have liked the internet, you know, being quite honest, because, you know, Billy could be a bit gruff from everything I'm going to understand. So I think fans constantly hounding him about Frightenstein probably would have really irked him, because it was a show that haunted him. And I guess it's not any different than, you know, Hulk Hogan will always be Hulk Hogan to us, but he does have this separate life out there. And Billy found that everybody remembered Frightenstein, despite the fact that he did all these other amazing shows and all these, you know, like things that he headlined as a movie on CBC. And yet people always remembered him for that. And, you know, you take the good and the bad with that. Like George Steele, same idea, right? Everybody will remember him as the animal, but you know what? I was a teacher. I was a coach. I remember me for these things too, please.
So I got one comment as well as one question left for you. The comment is from a fan again, saying that to say that I heard that you're working and pitching around a very big story, and to ask you what that is about.
I do have a good story out there. It's hopefully going to be published in one of the major Toronto newspapers. I can't really explain a lot at this point, but the fact is that I sometimes all these years of contacts come in with great exclusives, right? That's the nature of a journalist, right? You stay in touch with people. You try to stay on people's good sides, because every so often you get an amazing scoop that you want to share with the world. So yeah, I have to be a little bit coy with that, just like my next book project hasn't been announced yet, so I can't really say much about that yet either.
So that last comment, as well as the fan question about Bret Hart earlier, was courtesy of John Powell, by the way, just an FYI. And then last question for you here, as I did in my last interview, I want to do it with this one as well. So I call it the 5. Favorite singer or band, favorite song, favorite movie, favorite TV show, as well as favorite book besides your own.
Wow, I got to remember all that. Well, favorite band was probably Rush. I've seen them a number of times. Got to meet Geddy and Alex. Favorite song, probably "Fool in the Rain" by Led Zeppelin. Favorite TV show, oh man, that's changed over the years. I'm not sure I really have one anymore. It's all about today. Right now I'm really in the Yellowstone, right? That's a great show. What were the other two? Sorry, the favorite book?
So favorite book besides your own, as well as favorite movie.
Oh, Ted, for sure. By far is I just love that teddy bear. I still have my teddy bear. I just love the way Ted came alive. Ted 2 is probably a better movie, but they need to be sort of watched together. And favorite book. Oh, what have I read? Lots. I don't know. That's another good one. Probably Confederacy Dunces would be one. And that helped me understand my wife. That was one of those things when I met and got to know her. It was like, okay, to understand me, you need to understand this book. And it's a fascinating story, hugely comedic. And for those who've never read John Kennedy Toole's Confederacy Dunces, it was published posthumously, and he won a Pulitzer Prize for it. So, you know, it's a pretty amazing book. Go out and see it. It's never been made into a movie, but it's been talked about forever.
Maybe that'll be your next screenplay right there.
Well, Zach Galifianakis looked at it and wanted to do it, but it's such Ignatius J. Riley is just such a unique character that it's almost impossible to try to imagine. So I don't know. Maybe one day it'll get done.
So, guys, you've seen during the interview here, obviously, Greg's social media is Greg MEP, oliverbooks.ca. Greg, what else do you have to plug with regards to anything going on in your life there?
Well, we didn't really talk about the John Arezzi book, right? Which is the most recent one. mattmemories.com. It's the book I did with John Arezzi. It just came out the beginning of April. And I don't think I would have taken the project if it was just about pro wrestling. It also includes learning a lot about country music, and it includes a lot about baseball. I got to talk to John Gibbons, who of course was the manager of the Blue Jays. And so all those things add up to what was a fascinating project. And John's story is again, if you asked about, why should a wrestling fan read about Billy Van? It's like they're going to pick up this book as a wrestling fan and learn a lot about country music, learn some behind the scenes of things about minor league baseball. And the same thing, country music fans are going to learn a little bit about pro wrestling. So that's the most recent one, and hopefully worthy of a plug. But yeah, no, I like getting out there and talking about my stuff. Yeah. I remember George R. Martin said, you got to spend a week, doing publicity. Otherwise people forget you.
All right, very good, Greg. I want to say thank you very much for taking this time to be interviewed. It's been an honor for me. Obviously, a lot of projects on the go. I'm excited to know what's coming up next for you. But obviously your lips are sealed, so to speak, right now. So
I'm keeping kayfabe. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. This has been Greg Oliver, Slam Wrestling, of course, slamwrestling.net, as well as check out his book 17 and Counting, and you can find all the information obviously on cwnonline.ca. Greg, thank you very much once again, and like I said, it's been an honor interviewing you.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.